What's up, guys? I just saw Underwater and I thought, hey, why not do a top 10 favorite horror sci-fi films? So anyway, let's do this. What is up, guys? It's time for another top 10. I recently just reviewed Underwater. Be sure to check out that review, but it got me thinking, why not do a top 10 favorite sci-fi horror films? Because I love sci-fi horror. I really do. And I got 10 movies, and I'm going to give you 3 honorable mentions real quick. But before we get started, also be sure to check out my other top 10s. I have so many of them now. I'll put a link here to the playlist. And there's quite a few top 10s that are a little bit outside the box, and I think you might enjoy. So anyway, let's jump right into it. First honorable mention, I'm going to give you Alien Covenant. And if you paid attention to my favorite movies of the decade, I put Prometheus there. So I figured I'll put Covenant here because I actually love both movies about the same. And I like that Covenant didn't really do the same thing as Prometheus. It's kind of the logical step from Prometheus to Alien. Even though I think Ridley Scott actually wanted one more movie in there, but I don't think we're going to get that now. But I actually loved Covenant. I thought it had the right amount of xenomorph action, but still had a lot of that great David, engineer stuff from Prometheus. And it really kind of showed how the xenomorph was made, actually. So it's a controversial movie because I know a lot of people didn't like Covenant, but man, I loved it, actually. I like when the Alien movies really dive into that lore and step outside of the comfort zone a little bit. Next one I'm gonna go with is Under the Skin, a little indie film with Scarlett Johansson, who plays this alien, comes to Earth, and she literally just seduces men throughout the movie. But I like a good art house type film. Same director as Sexy Beast with this movie, and I just thought it was very well directed. It's one of those movies that after you get through watching it, you can't stop thinking about it. And there's a lot of kind of shocking scenes, where just unexpected scenes throughout this movie. And I think Scarlett Johansson does a really good job pretty much playing an alien trying to fit into our world. And this movie kind of says a lot about us as society in relation to her, especially in terms of men and sexuality. And the last honorable mention, this is just a fun one that I put on here, and nobody ever talks about this movie really, is Holloman. I mean, we have this movie called The Invisible Man coming out pretty soon. And I thought Holloman was very good, directed by Paul Verhoeven, who is one of the heavy-hitting directors of the 90s. If you want directors that have shock value to them, he did Basic Instinct, he did Starship Troopers, and this movie fit right into that mold. He was one of those directors that would really take risks, or I guess is because he's still alive, but push boundaries. And Hollow Man definitely does push boundaries, but the special effects in this movie really hold up very well, and I loved Kevin Bacon, who played Sebastian in the movie too. But a pretty nail-biting flick, actually. Okay, now let's jump into the top 10. Number 10 is going to be 10 Cloverfield Lane. I was thinking about putting Cloverfield, but you know what? I actually prefer 10 Cloverfield Lane. It's a lot more stripped down, and really for most of the movie, it feels kind of like, a kidnap type movie. It doesn't really lean on the sci-fi element until the last bit of the movie, but that's fine with me. It's still a great horror movie. And I loved Mary Elizabeth Winstead in this, having to deal with John Goodman, which when I first saw the movie, I didn't like John Goodman as much, but it's one of those movies, the more you watch it, the more you appreciate his performance because it's not the cliche type of kidnapper performance, and I think it worked very well. Number 9, glad I wore this shirt, Night of the Creeps, Thrill Me. Night of the Creeps is a movie I saw on HBO so many times back in the 80s, directed by Fred Decker, and it's just so fun. It's kind of a zombie movie, kind of an alien movie, because these aliens, they send these slugs into the victims, and then the victims pretty much become zombies. But you talk about a really fun 80s flick, it just has that 80s feel to it with the high school and everything, and then just that sci-fi horror element, and then Tom Atkins to boot.
I got good news and bad news, girls. The good news is your dates are here.
What's the bad news?
They're dead.
Tom Atkins, I think this is one of his favorite movies that he's done, actually. He loves Night of the Creeps. But also, I like the 2 main characters, You got the one kid who's disabled and his best friend, and it's just always fun to see, the nerdy type kids, beat out the jocks. And that's pretty much what happens in this movie. But just a lot of fun zombie action, too. Number 8 is a Robert Rodriguez directed movie, The Faculty. And The Faculty is another one of those movies that takes place in a high school, and you got these aliens who are trying to like take over the world, but first thing they do is try to take over the high school. There's that line in the movie, would they try to take over the world Independence Day style, or would they start from the inside and work their way out? And that's what they do in this movie. But you just got a really great cast with Elijah Wood, Josh Hartnett, and so many other heavy hitters in this one. And it just has that 90s feel, but in a really good way. Great soundtrack. I mean, just so much fun to be had with The Faculty. But I like that it's not a big sci-fi movie, you know? I like that it's really stripped down. I think that works well for it. Number 7, Pitch Black. You know, Vin Diesel loves the Riddick franchise so much, but unfortunately the franchise that does so well is the Fast and Furious franchise for him. I've always preferred the Riddick franchise. I just love the character of Riddick. He's like the ultimate anti-hero. You know, he never says anything hardly, which is usually the best way to approach an anti-hero. And at the end of the day, he just kicks ass, you know? And I like that the aliens in this movie, they only come out at night, you know, and when you're asleep. But, you know, throughout the movie, you never really trust Riddick. He's actually really selfish, and that just makes him more interesting. But even though the first one takes place like on another planet, it's very small in scale, whereas where they got into trouble is on the second one, The Chronicles of Riddick. They tried to go way too big with it, and that movie kind of sucked. Number 6, a Cronenberg classic, The Fly. The biggest thing I love about The Fly is Jeff Goldblum's performance throughout, you know, because Jeff Goldblum, he's just one of those signature actors, has these mannerisms that you don't really learn. They're just kind of in the blood. And watching Brundle slowly like descend into this fly, because it really is a love story, you know, where he falls in love with Gina Davis's character. And so it's tragic how she has to watch this guy that she just fell in love with slowly turn into a fly. And you know, throughout the movie, just mentally, he starts becoming more of a villain that he can't even control, you know? And I think Goldblum's performance was perfection in this movie, and Cronenberg's direction, insane. Everybody loves the freaking arm wrestling scene where he like breaks the guy's wrist and the bone like sticks out. Good stuff. Number 5, Event Horizon. This is a movie I reviewed, I think last year, and I haven't seen the movie in years, like I think since it first came out. But it really feels almost like a Hellraiser type of movie, but it's better than like pretty much all the Hellraiser movies except the first one. But you know, you got a strong cast in here too with Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill. And this might be one of the scariest horror sci-fi movies out there. I remember like in the last act, it gets really demonic and evil, and it's like, what if hell was actually on a planet? You know, they go to this planet and the planet's literally like hell. And big props to Paul W.S. Anderson for directing this, because I'm not a big fan of his direction, but I think he knocked it out of the park with this one, actually. His earlier movies are better, like this one and Soldier, but I wish he'd go back and do movies like this again. Number 4, a movie that came out, I believe a couple years ago, Annihilation. I love movies that are just really thought-provoking, and this one was. And now you have this like alien entity that comes down and has this like shimmer where it kind of crosses DNA. You know, they play with a lot of ideas in this movie in terms of science fiction. When you play around with nature, the disastrous results that can come about, all of that. And this movie was directed beautifully. And there's a lot of controversy, I think, over the last act of the movie because it does go bonkers, but I actually love the hell out of it. Number 3, Predator. Predator to me is really like one of the greatest action films ever made. It just happens to be a sci-fi horror movie as well. In terms of characters, I don't think you can do better than Predator. I mean, every single character in this movie is so identifiable. The Predator himself. When you have a creature that is more intimidating than Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know you're doing something right. And by the end of the movie, there was no doubt in your mind that Schwarzenegger could not hold his own against this Predator. He was going to get his ass handed to him, which he does. But Predator is one of those movies that you just can watch every single year, over and over and over again. There's a reason people still talk about Predator constantly. And it's not the strongest franchise in the world at all, but that first movie is just perfection. Number 2, Alien. And you're probably wondering why Alien isn't my number 1. You're going to find out in just a second. But Alien is the granddaddy, I think, of all science fiction horror movies. It's the one that every other sci-fi horror tries to achieve. You know, you constantly hear Ridley Scott's name mentioned in terms of like directors trying to do a sci-fi movie. I think the xenomorph is probably the most interesting creature out there because it's so unique looking. There's nothing that looks like the xenomorph. It's almost beautiful looking, yet one of the scariest things ever. The idea to have the thing ingest inside your chest and then be born outside of your chest. Just that whole biology of the xenomorph and how it's created, coming from the parasite and all that. It just creates wonder. And then you have these great characters. Ripley, who is probably the greatest female character ever created. She's just a badass. But in the first movie, she's not presented that way at all until like the end of the movie. But just in terms of direction too, I mean, Ridley Scott's direction of the first movie is so insanely good. The scale, it just looks amazing. The fact that he had all these sets in his mind to make this movie. Also guys, I know you're gonna throw tomatoes at me because I didn't put Aliens on here, but I didn't want to have 3 Alien movies. And yes, Aliens is better than Alien Covenant. I really can't explain myself, but I wanted to show some love to Covenant because a lot of you guys don't. And then number one of my all-time favorite films ever, John Carpenter's The Thing. The Thing is so interesting because when it first came out, it was just this big box office bomb because it came out around the same time as E.T. And I will say, still to this day, The Thing I think is one of the most terrifying movies ever created. And you know, The Thing itself, this creature that doesn't really have a form. It can form into anything. You know, and there's scenes in the movie where it looks completely disgusting. And then there's scenes where it just looks like a human. But the one thing that makes The Thing amazing to me is the paranoia aspect of it. And how nobody can trust anybody. Everybody wonders who the Thing is. And that just adds another element of danger because the Thing itself, it's a creature. It's a dangerous creature. But when the guy right next to you could be the creature and he's just waiting for a chance to attack, that can make a person go completely insane. And John Carpenter directed this movie perfectly. He has stated that this is probably the movie that he's the proudest of. And that's why I think The Thing deserves to be number 1 on this list. So anyway guys, that is my top 10 greatest sci-fi horror films. Let me know if I missed any in the comments. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day, and on Fridays, we do free for Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.